The metallic taste of blood filled my mouth before the pain registered. Lying crumpled on the hardwood at the bottom of the stairs, I felt the wet crunch of my ribs breaking. But the real fracture happened when I looked up. My son was not dialing 911. He was leaning over the banister, whispering to his wife. "Tell the paramedics," she slipped. In that moment, staring at his cold eyes, I knew I had to destroy him. My name is Lorraine Doyle, and at 62 years old, I learned that gravity is not the cruelest force on earth. My son is... The tumble felt endless. Wood struck bone, over and over, a chaotic rhythm of impact and agony. I landed in a heap at the bottom of the grand oak staircase I had paid for with 30 years of sweat and bleach fumes. Snap. That was my rib. The sound reverberated through my chest, louder than the fall itself. Then came the taste, hot, metallic copper flooding my mouth. Above me, the house was silent for a heartbeat. Then, a shrill scream pierced the air. It was Sienna. "Oh my God, Caleb!" She fell. It sounded rehearsed, too high-pitched, too theatrical for genuine horror. I tried to lift my head, but the room spun violently. Then came the heavy thud of footsteps, not running to help, but walking to assess. I looked up through a haze of tears and saw them at the top of the landing. My beautiful boy, the one I had breastfed and put through private school, leaned close to his wife. His face was not twisted in worry, but in calculation. She slipped. Understand. His voice was a low hiss that carried down the stairs like a draft of cold air. "Just say she slipped. Don't say anything stupid to the doctors." I lay there, unable to move my legs, waiting for the frantic beep of a phone, the call to 911. Instead, I heard shuffling. "Move the rug." Caleb muttered. "Pull it to the left. Make it look like it slid under her foot. We need to be clear on this if questions get asked." They were staging the scene. I was not a mother to them anymore. I was a liability they were trying to manage, a mess to be cleaned up like a spill in aisle 4. I wanted to scream, but only a gurgle of blood bubbled past my lips. The lights were blinding when help finally arrived. It felt like 30 minutes had passed. Far too long for an accident in a wealthy suburb. A team of paramedics swarmed me, lifting me onto a board. The pain was a white-hot, blinding flash that nearly made me black out. Inside the ambulance, an older nurse with greying hair rolled up my sleeve to start an intravenous line. She paused, her eyes fixed on the purple bruises on my upper arm. They were fresh, the exact shape of Caleb's fingers from where he had grabbed me before the shove. She leaned in close, her voice barely a whisper against the siren's wail. "Mom? Do you feel safe at home?" I opened my mouth to speak, to tell her about the shove, to tell her about the cold calculation in his eyes. But a shadow fell over me. Caleb had climbed into the back with us. "Mum gets terrible vertigo," he told the nurse, his face a sudden mask of concern. He reached out to stroke my hair, and I flinched. She imagines things when her blood sugar is low. She has been getting so confused lately. The nurse pulled back. I saw the look in her eyes shift from suspicion to pity. He was already painting the picture. The senile old woman who fell. The burden. The hospital was a blur of fluorescent lights and beeping machines. They pumped me full of painkillers that made the edges of the world fuzzy. But my mind was sharp. Sharper than it had been in years. The fog of motherly love had lifted, burned away by the impact of the floor. I waited until the nurse left the room and Caleb went to the cafeteria to get coffee for Sienna. My purse was tucked in the plastic bag under the bed. My fingers, trembling and swollen, fumbled through the leather. I did not need to look for the card, but finding it gave me strength. It was worn at the edges, Vestara North Legal. It was the firm that had helped me sign the biggest contracts when I was running Valora Lex Maintenance Group. I reached for the landline on the bedside table. My breath hitched as I dialed. 1, 8, 0, 0. The numbers came back like muscle memory from 15 years ago. It rang 4 times. Law offices. Marcia speaking. The background noise was loud, a busy office. I swallowed the blood in my throat. Marcia. It's Lorraine Doyle. There was a pause. Lorraine. My God, I haven't heard from you in a decade. Is everything all right? Caleb just pushed me down the stairs. I whispered, my voice cracking but my resolve hardening like concrete. He is going to try to declare me incompetent. He is going to take it all. The background noise on her end vanished. I could hear her shifting, moving to a quiet room. Her voice dropped the polite professional tone and became the shark I remembered hiring to fight union disputes in the 90s. Listen to me very carefully. Lorraine, do not sign anything. Nothing. If the police come in, say nothing if Caleb is in the room. I am leaving the office now. We are initiating the emergency protection plan. I will be there within the hour. I hung up the phone and wiped the receiver with my sheet. I lay back against the stiff pillows. My ribs screamed with every breath, but for the first time in years, the confusion was gone. I closed my eyes. I used to pray for Caleb to find himself. I used to pray for him to be happy. Not anymore. If they want to bury me, I whispered to the empty room, I am taking them down with me, lying in that sterile hospital bed, staring at the rhythmic drip of the IV bag. My mind drifted back to a place that smelled of sulfur and wet concrete. It was a dying industrial town in Ohio, the kind of place where the sky was perpetually bruised purple by smokestacks, and hope was something you packed away with the winter coats. I did not start out as a woman who owned a portfolio of properties. I started as the daughter of a ghost and a night cleaner. My father walked out when I was 9 years old, leaving behind nothing but a drawer full of unpaid bills. My mother spent her life on her knees, scrubbing other people's floors, just to keep our electricity from being shut off. Though the disconnect notices still came like clockwork. By the time I was 12, I was working off the books at a local laundromat. I learned the chemistry of poverty there. I learned which chemicals could lift coal dust from a collar and how to make a frayed cuff look respectable for one more Sunday service. I never went to college. While girls my age were rushing sororities, I was rushing to catch the bus to downtown office buildings. I took the grunt work emptying trash bins, buffing marble floors until my shoulders burned. But I was not just cleaning. I was studying. I kept a notebook in my apron pocket, jotting down how much the management companies wasted on supplies, how often the HVAC systems failed, and where they bled money. At 30, armed with nothing but those notebooks and a reckless sort of courage, I founded Valora Lex Maintenance Group. The name was nonsense. Something I stitched together to sound corporate and important. But the reality was just me. 3 guys who smoked too much, and a rusted Ford van that smelled like bleach. I worked 16 to 18 hours a day. There were nights I was in a cocktail dress under my coveralls, scrubbing a toilet in a high-end mall because an employee called in sick, only to strip off the gear, wash my hands raw, and walk into a boardroom to negotiate a contract worth $50,000. I was relentless. I had to be. That was how I met Thomas. He was a rigid, unsmiling accountant for one of the property firms I was servicing. We met over a dispute about an invoice. "Your numbers are accurate." "Ms. Doyle," he had said, pushing his glasses up his nose, looking at me with a seriousness that made my stomach flutter. "But your cash flow strategy is terrifying. You are one bad month away from bankruptcy." He saved my business during the recession. He showed me how to hide my fear behind spreadsheets. We had a quiet marriage, built on shared exhaustion and the thrill of seeing the bank account grow. We lived on tuna casserole and cheap coffee for years, pouring every cent back into Valoralex until we became the primary contractor for dozens of skylines in Denver and the surrounding areas. We were older when we finally felt safe enough to have a child. Caleb was my miracle. He was the soft place in my hard life. I remember holding him in the delivery room, looking at his unblemished skin, and making a silent vow that would eventually become my undoing. "You will never feel the cold," I whispered to him. "You will never know what it is to be hungry or poor. I will build a wall of money so high you will never see the ugly things I saw." I kept that promise. I missed his first steps because I was supervising a crew at a convention center. I missed his lead role in the school play because a pipe burst in a client's server room. To apologize, I threw money at the absence. I bought him the newest gaming consoles, the brand name clothes, the first car that cost more than my first house. I paid for private schools where he learned to look down on people who worked with their hands. Lying here with broken ribs, I realized my greatest sin was not that I worked too hard. It was that I stole the struggle from him. I just want him to be happy. Thomas used to say when Caleb would demand a new phone because the old one was 6 months old. "No," I would reply, signing the check. "I just want him to have everything we didn't." I succeeded. I raised a son who never knew the panic of a late bill, and in doing so, I raised a man who thought the world owed him a living simply because he existed. I thought I was giving him a head start, but I was really crippling him. And now, that crippled boy had grown into a man strong enough to throw his mother down a flight of stairs. Caleb grew up in a universe that did not operate by the same laws of physics that governed mine. While my summers were spent scraping gum off the undersides of school desks, his were spent at sailing camps in Cape Cod or backpacking across Europe on a credit card that I paid off every single month. I created a bubble for him, a pristine world where consequences were just things that happened to other people. I remember the summer he turned 16. Thomas and I tried to instill some work ethic in him. We brought him to a warehouse site Valoralex was managing. I handed him a mop and pointed to the loading dock hallway. He looked at the mop handle like it was covered in disease. "Mom, seriously." He laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound that grated on my nerves. "You expect me to touch that I wasn't born to clean up other people's filth? That's below me." I should have slapped him. I should have made him scrub until his hands blistered. Instead, I let him go sit in the air-conditioned van while I finished the job. I told myself he was destined for executive boardrooms, not utility closets. That delusion continued through college. He bounced from business to philosophy to communications, taking 6 years to finish a 4-year degree. Then came The Ventures, a custom sneaker app, a sustainable coffee import business. Each one failed, and each time, I quietly wrote a check to cover the losses, telling Thomas it was an investment in his education. Then came Sienna. He met her at a rooftop party in Denver. She was a life coach and influencer, a stunning blonde woman who spoke in buzzwords about manifesting abundance and vibrating at high frequencies. The first time I met her, she hugged me a little too tightly, smelling of expensive vanilla and ambition. "Your aura is so powerful." "Lorraine," she said, her eyes scanning the designer bag on my shoulder. "I can feel the success radiating off you." I invited them to dinner at our home a week later. I wanted to know who she was, where she came from. But Sienna did not want to talk about her childhood or her passions. She wanted to talk about Valoralex. "It is so empowering to see a woman-led empire," she said, swirling her Pinot Noir. "Caleb tells me you own the buildings downtown, not just the contracts. That must be immense. What is the current valuation of the portfolio, just ballpark?" I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. She wasn't asking about my life. She was appraising me. Later that night, while washing dishes, Thomas stood beside me. He was usually the quiet one, content to let me lead, but his face was grim. "I don't trust her." "Lorraine," he said, drying a plate with slow, deliberate circles. "She seems driven," I offered weakly. Thomas shook his head. "She looks at Caleb like he is a winning lottery ticket." "She isn't in love with him. She is in love with what you can give him." I brushed it off. I wanted Caleb to be settled. I wanted him to have someone. So I ignored the gut instinct that screamed she was a predator. I paid for their wedding 2 years later. A lavish affair at a ski resort in Aspen that cost more than my first 3 years of revenue combined. During the reception, Sienna stood up to give a toast. She looked ethereal in white, raising her glass to the room. "Caleb and I are so blessed." She purred into the microphone. "We are ready to build our future and to continue the incredible legacy that Lorraine and Thomas have built. We are going to take it to new heights." Everyone clapped. I felt nauseous. She wasn't talking about working hard. She was talking about inheritance. Almost immediately after the honeymoon, Sienna quit her life coaching business. She announced she was going to dedicate herself full-time to supporting Caleb's journey to find his true purpose. In reality, that meant they both stopped working entirely. They leased a luxury condo in the city. The rent paid automatically from my accounts, and spent their days networking at country clubs. I was too busy managing the company to fight them. But Thomas, my careful, silent Thomas, saw what was coming. About 6 months before he died, he came home from the bank with a small black key. He sat me down at the kitchen table. "Lorraine," he said, his voice serious, "I opened a separate safety deposit box today, and a separate holding account. It is in my name only." "Why?" I asked, confused. "We share everything." He took my hand, his palms rough and warm. "Because you love him too much. You have a blind spot the size of a mountain when it comes to Caleb. I want a layer of protection, just in case one day you get too soft and he asks for too much." I nodded, thinking he was just being the paranoid accountant he had always been. I didn't ask how much was in it. I didn't ask where the documents were. I just put the key in my jewelry box and forgot about it. I did not know then that the small metal key would be the only weapon I had left when the war finally started. Thomas died on a Tuesday evening, slumped over the steering wheel of his sedan just 3 blocks from our driveway. It was a massive stroke. He was gone before the car even rolled to a stop against the curb. I did not get to say goodbye. I did not get to tell him he was right about everything. The funeral was a blur of black umbrellas and meaningless casseroles. It was small and dignified, just the way Thomas would have wanted it. But Caleb made it a show. He stood by the grave, sobbing loudly, his shoulders shaking as he leaned on Sienna for support. People whispered about what a devoted son he was, how deeply he felt things. I just stood there, dry-eyed and hollowed out, feeling like the wind was blowing straight through a hole in my chest where my husband used to be. After the guests left, the silence in our big house was deafening. For 40 years, the rhythm of my life had been set to the rustle of Thomas's newspaper at the kitchen table and the smell of his pipe tobacco. Now, there was just dust motes dancing in the afternoon sun. I sat in his chair and realized for the first time that my joints ached, that my hands trembled when I poured tea. I felt old. I felt terrified. That was when the visits started. Caleb and Sienna came by almost every day. They brought takeout containers of organic food and bottles of wine. They sat with me, filling the silence with chatter. "We just don't want you to be lonely." "Mum," Caleb said one evening, holding my hand across the table, "Dad wouldn't want you sitting here in this big, empty museum by yourself." It started with emotional support, but it quickly pivoted to logistics. Sienna was the one who gently steered the conversation toward money. "You are managing so much alone," she said, her voice soft and dripping with concern. "The landscaping, the property taxes, the maintenance. It is going to cause you so much stress. Why don't you sell this place? We can pool our resources. We can buy a bigger place in Cherry Creek. You would have your own suite. And think about the kids. Emma and Jonah miss their grandma." I was tired. I was grieving. The idea of waking up in a house full of life again, of having breakfast with my grandchildren, sounded like salvation. So, I agreed. I sold the home Thomas and I had built our life in. I took the proceeds, a significant sum, and put it down on a sprawling modern estate that Caleb picked out. During the closing process, amidst a mountain of paperwork, Caleb slid a document across the lawyer's table. "This is just a limited power of attorney." "Mom," he said, tapping the paper with a pen, "it just helps me talk to the banks and the contractors, so you don't have to drive across town every time a signature is needed." "I will only use it when I really need to. I promise. It is just insurance." I looked at his face. He looked so much like Thomas in that moment. I signed it. I signed away my autonomy with a ballpoint pen, thinking I was buying peace of mind. The first month in the new house felt like a healing balm. I had a beautiful suite on the ground floor with French doors opening to the garden. I spent afternoons reading to Emma and helping Jonah build Lego sets. I thought I had made the right choice. But then, the rules began. Small boundaries that tightened like a noose. One Tuesday morning, I went to the kitchen to make toast. Sienna was there, setting up a ring light and a tripod. "Oh, Lorraine." "Honey?" she said, her smile tight and not reaching her eyes. "I am about to film a segment on mindful nutrition for my channel. The kitchen is a hot set from 9 to 11. Could you maybe eat in your room?" I retreated. Then came the shoes. My orthotics were comfortable, but Sienna said they scuffed the imported marble. Then the television? "The blue light disrupts the kids' circadian rhythms," Caleb told me, taking the remote from my hand at 9 o'clock at night. We are a screen-free household after dark. Caleb became a ghost. He was always in meetings or handling a crisis for one of his vague consulting projects. He stopped looking me in the eye. Sienna took over everything. She scheduled my doctor appointments. She decided what groceries were bought. She even started suggesting I shouldn't drive to the library because traffic is getting so aggressive these days. I told myself it was just an adjustment period. I told myself they were just being protective. Then came the night that shattered the illusion. I had woken up thirsty around 2 in the morning. I crept out of my room, careful not to let my floorboards creak. As I neared the kitchen, I saw the glow of a phone screen and heard Sienna's voice. She wasn't whispering. She sounded annoyed. "No. Trent, we can't rush it," she was saying. I froze in the hallway shadows. She is healthy as a horse right now. We just have to wait. When she gets a little frailer, maybe takes a bad fall or starts forgetting things, then we make the move. Until then, we just keep her dependent. Once the mental decline is documented, everything automatically transfers to us. We just have to be patient. I stood there in the dark, clutching my robe, feeling the cold tile seep into my bare feet. They weren't caring for me. They were waiting for me to rot. The unraveling of my life began with a missing tax return. I needed a copy for a minor banking query. So I went to the filing cabinet in the corner of my room. It was locked. But the key I kept in my jewelry box turned the cylinder without resistance. Inside, however, was chaos. Envelopes from the bank had been slit open. My savings passbooks were gone. My copy of the will Thomas and I had drafted 20 years ago had vanished. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I dug out my old laptop from the bottom drawer, a heavy machine I hadn't used in months. It took 10 minutes to boot up. But when I finally logged into my primary checking account, the screen illuminated a disaster. $350,000. That was the amount transferred out in the last 6 months alone. It had gone to accounts with names I did not recognize, shell companies with vague titles like Apex Consulting and Future Vision Holdings. The credit card statement was worse. There were charges for online gambling, luxury handbags, and a lease on a sports car I had never seen. I called the bank immediately, my hands shaking so hard I dropped the phone twice. "I am sorry. Mrs. Doyle," the teller said, her voice cheerfully indifferent. "But Caleb Doyle is listed as a joint authorized owner. The power of attorney on file grants him full access to move funds for family management. Is there a specific transaction you dispute?" I hung up. I tried to print the statements, the printer whirring loudly in the silence of the afternoon. Before the second page could slide out, the door opened. Caleb and Sienna were there. They didn't look guilty. They looked like parents catching a toddler with a marker. "Mum?" Caleb said, his voice dripping with condescending sweetness. "What are you doing? You are getting yourself all worked up over numbers again. You know you have been mixing up your zeros lately." Sienna moved past me, her perfume suffocatingly sweet, and gently pulled the papers from the tray. "Let us handle this. Lorraine, you just relax. Stress is so bad for your blood pressure. They took the evidence. They took my reality. That night, sleep was impossible. Around 1 in the morning, I heard a voice coming from the study down the hall. The door was cracked open. I crept closer, pressing my ear to the gap. It was Caleb, on a FaceTime call. The face on the screen was a man with a thick neck and tattoos creeping up his throat. I recognized him from the wedding photos, Trent Halloran, Sienna's older brother. "The guardianship papers are ready," Trent was saying, his voice gravelly and rough. "We just need a doctor to sign off on the cognitive decline. Once she is declared incompetent, we can put her in that quiet facility in Wyoming. It is cheap, isolated, and they don't ask questions. Then we can liquidate the rest of the portfolio without her interference." "She is stubborn," Caleb replied, rubbing his temples. "She still asks too many questions." Trent laughed, a cold, ugly sound. I have done this before. Caleb. Old people get confused when you change their routine, mess with her meds, move her stuff around. By the time the judge sees her, she will look like she belongs in a home. I backed away, bile rising in my throat. They were not just stealing from me. They were planning to erase me. The next morning, I saw my chance. Caleb had left his laptop open on the kitchen island while he went to the gym. My hands trembled as I opened his email client. There it was, a thread between Sienna and Trent, titled Asset Allocation Strategy. I didn't have time to forward it. I pulled a small USB drive from my pocket, a relic from my Valora Lex days that I kept on my keychain, and jammed it into the port. I dragged the folder over. The progress bar crawled. 90%. 95. Done. I yanked the drive out just as the garage door opener rumbled. Sienna began her psychological warfare that afternoon. She sat me down with a notebook labelled Tracking Cognitive Decline in big black letters. Let's play a memory game. Lorraine, she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. What did we have for dinner on Tuesday? No, that was Thursday. See, you are getting confused again. She wrote something down. She was documenting failures she was inventing. It bled into the children, too. Later that day, Jonah looked up from his colouring book and said matter-of-factly, "Mom says you forget things because your brain is shrinking. She says you are going to go live in a white house with doctors soon, so we can have our own rooms." I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake him. Instead, I went to my room and locked the door. The breaking point came 2 days later. Caleb walked into my room with a stack of documents, just some medical insurance updates. "Mom," he said, uncapping a pen and thrusting it at me. "We need to switch providers to get you better coverage. Just sign at the tabs." I looked at the header. It wasn't insurance. It was a voluntary transfer of medical power of attorney, granting him the right to make all health decisions for me, including institutionalization. I feel dizzy," I stammered, putting a hand to my forehead. "I can't read the fine print right now. Caleb, leave it. I will look at it tomorrow. Just sign it. Mum, it is urgent." He snapped, his mask slipping for a second. "No," I said, sharper than I intended. "I said I am dizzy. Get out." He stared at me, his eyes narrowing. He knew I was resisting, and I knew that my time was running out. If I didn't act soon, the next fall wouldn't be accidental. The violence started over a bruise. It was just after 7 in the evening when I saw the ugly purple welt on Jonah's forearm. He winced when I rolled up his sleeve to wash his hands for dinner. He told me he had fallen off the slide at the park because his mother was too busy setting up her tripod to spot him. I marched into the living room, where Sienna was editing footage on her phone. The rage that had been simmering in my gut for months finally boiled over. "You are neglecting him," I said, my voice shaking not with age, but with fury. "He is hurt. Sienna. He is hurt because you were too busy filming yourself being a mindful mother to actually be one. You are not fit parents if you only see your children as props." Sienna dropped her phone on the sofa, her face twisted, the mask of the gentle influencer slipping off to reveal the viper beneath. She turned to Caleb, who had just walked in from the garage. "Did you hear that she screamed, pointing a manicured finger at me? Your mother just called me a bad mother. She called me terrible. Tell me, Caleb? Whose house is this? Who runs this family?" It was a trap. She was backing him into a corner, forcing him to choose between his wife and his mother. Caleb looked at me, his eyes bloodshot and wild. He had been talking to Trent all week. I knew that. Trent had been poisoning him, telling him to act fast before I lawyered up. I am sick of this, Caleb roared, slamming his hand against the wall. I am sick of you judging us. Mom, you always looked down on me. You think I am useless. You think I don't know how you look at me. You were never a mother to me. You were a CEO who happened to have a kid. That is not true. I shot back, though the accusation stung. It is true, he yelled, stepping into my personal space. You missed my 10th birthday for a contract negotiation. You bought my love because you didn't have time to give it, and now you want to come into my house and tell me how to raise my kids. I took a deep breath. I looked him dead in the eye. I made mistakes. Caleb, I own every single one of them. I was absent. I threw money at problems instead of time, but that does not give you the right to steal from me. It does not give you the permission to empty my accounts and plan to lock me away in some cheap nursing home in Wyoming so you can burn through my life's work. The room went dead silent. Sienna froze, her mouth slightly open. Caleb turned pale, the colour draining from his face as if I had slapped him. You are paranoid, he stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. You are imagining things. You are confused again. I am not confused, I shouted, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. I saw the emails. Caleb, I saw the transfers. And tomorrow morning, the first thing I am doing is driving to the bank. And then I am going to see the lawyer Thomas told me about. I am auditing every single cent you have touched. I saw the panic flare in his eyes. It was the look of a drowning man who realizes the lifeboat is leaving. I turned my back on him. I had said my piece. I started to walk up the grand staircase to get my purse and my keys. I needed to get out of there. I was on the 3rd step when I heard his heavy footsteps pounding behind me. No, he screamed. He grabbed my arm. At first, I thought he was trying to pull me back to talk, but his grip was bruising. I looked down at him, and I didn't see my son. I saw a stranger terrified of poverty. Mum, you will not ruin everything, he shrieked. He didn't pull. He pushed. He shoved me with both hands, a desperate, forceful heave against my chest. My slipper lost traction on the polished oak. I felt gravity claim me. Caleb, I gasped. Then the world became a blur of spinning ceiling fans and hard edges. My shoulder struck the banister. My hip hit the edge of a step. I tumbled backward, my limbs flailing uselessly. The impact at the bottom knocked the wind out of me with a sickening thud. Pain exploded in my side, a sharp, hot crack of ribs giving way. My head slammed against the floorboards, and my vision swam with black spots. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard Sienna scream. It was a high, piercing sound. Oh my God, Caleb. What did you do? I lay there, tasting copper, unable to draw a breath. I saw Caleb standing at the top of the stairs, his hands still raised in the pushing motion, his face a mask of horror and realization. He ran down the stairs, skipping steps, and skidded to a halt beside me. But he didn't check my pulse. He looked at Sienna. Shut up, he hissed, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper. Just tell the paramedics, she slipped. You understand? She slipped. Do not say anything stupid. I tried to move my finger, tried to point, but my body refused to obey. As my eyes began to close, dragging me into unconsciousness, I saw a tiny blue light blinking in the corner of the hallway ceiling. The doorbell's security camera. It was facing the front door, but the wide-angle lens captured the bottom of the stairs perfectly. They had forgotten it was there. And as the darkness took me, I held on to that blue light like a lifeline. The doctor told me I had 2 broken ribs and a mild concussion, but it was the look in his eyes, not the X-rays. That told me the real diagnosis. He suspected abuse. He asked a social worker to come into the room, a young woman with a clipboard and eyes that had seen too much. Caleb tried to stay. He stood by the head of my bed, hovering like a vulture. "She is confused," he told the social worker, placing a hand on my shoulder that felt heavy and threatening. "She gets agitated when I am not here. She will panic if you make me leave." The social worker did not blink. "I need to speak to the patient alone." "Sir?" "It is hospital protocol. Please wait in the hallway." Caleb hesitated. He leaned down, pretending to fix my pillow, his lips brushing my ear. "Do not say anything stupid," he whispered, his voice vibrating with suppressed rage. "If you lie to them, you will pay for it." He walked out, but he left the door cracked until the social worker firmly shut it. "Mrs. Doyle," she said gently, pulling a chair close. "Did you fall, or were you pushed?" I looked at the sterile white ceiling. I thought about the phone call with Trent. I thought about the missing money. I thought about the shove. I do not believe I slipped," I said, my voice trembling. "My son pushed me." She wrote something down in her notebook, those 4 words. Suspected elder abuse. Felt like a heavy stone rolling off my chest. 20 minutes later, Marcia Levitt walked in. She was no longer the hungry young associate I remembered. She was a woman in her 50s, wearing a suit that cost more than my first car, carrying a leather briefcase that looked like armor. "Lorraine," she said, taking my hand. She didn't offer empty platitudes. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick, yellowed envelope. "Your husband gave this to me 3 years before he died. He made me swear on my license that I would only give it to you if you called me to report that Caleb or anyone else was trying to take your autonomy." I stared at the envelope. It was Thomas's handwriting. "Only open if Lorraine is in danger." I felt a surge of anger. He had expected this. He had known our son was capable of this when I was still blind to it. I tore it open with shaking fingers. Inside was a single silver key and a legal document establishing a trust. "It is a legacy trust," Marcia explained. Her voice all business. "Thomas moved 40% of his personal equity in Valora Lex and $500,000 in cash into a separate entity. It is untouchable by Caleb. It is untouchable by anyone but you. He hid it so deep, even the IRS barely sees it until you activate it." There was a note clipped to the trust deed. "My dearest Lorraine," it read. "I hope you never read this. I hope I am wrong about our boy. But I have seen the way he looks at what we built. He does not see the work. He sees the payout. And I know you. You love him so much you would let him pick your pockets if he smiled while doing it. This is your safety net. Use it to save yourself." I cried then, not from pain, but from the crushing weight of Thomas's love and his terrifying accuracy. He had protected me from my own blindness. "Here is the plan," Marcia said, handing me a tissue. "We are going to the bank right now to access that safety deposit box. Then, we are filing an emergency protective order. We are revoking the power of attorney you signed. We are freezing every asset we can touch." "I can't walk well," I whispered. "I brought a wheelchair," Marcia replied. "And I have a car waiting. We are not waiting for Caleb to come back with a smooth story." Leaving the hospital felt like a jailbreak. Marcia wheeled me out the back exit to avoid the waiting room where Caleb was likely pacing. As I lowered myself into the leather seat of her sedan, wincing as my ribs protested, I looked out the window. I was broken. I was betrayed. But as the car pulled away, heading toward the bank to claim the weapon my husband had buried for me, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I was in control. Drive fast. Marcia, I said, clutching the envelope to my chest. We have a war to start. The bank vault was cold and silent, a stark contrast to the chaos unraveling in my life. Inside Thomas's safety deposit box, next to the trust documents, sat a small silver USB drive. When Marcia plugged it into her secure laptop, we found not just financial records, but a roadmap of defense. Thomas had spent his final months analyzing Valora Lex's corporate structure, highlighting every legal loophole a greedy heir might exploit and drafting preemptive motions to block them. He had seen the wolf at the door long before I did. Marcia wasted no time. She took those files and the hospital report regarding my injuries and filed for an emergency revocation of the power of attorney. Because the medical report stated suspected physical abuse, the judge did not hesitate. Within 3 hours, the court granted a temporary freeze on all assets involving Caleb or Sienna. I did not go back to the house. I could not. Marcia arranged for a secure temporary apartment in a high-rise downtown, a place with 24-hour doormen and keycard access. My grandchildren, Emma and Jonah, were the only ones I worried about, but I knew I could not save them until I saved myself. That evening, Marcia introduced me to Walt Herrera. He was a former detective with eyes that looked like they had seen every variety of human cruelty. He placed a thick file on the coffee table. I tracked the money trail for the last 12 months. Walt said, his voice gravelly. It is ugly. Mrs. Doyle. Caleb didn't just skim off the top. He forged your signature to take out a second mortgage on the rental property on 4th Street. I felt the blood drain from my face. He mortgaged the rental that was supposed to be for the grandkids' college fund. He took out $150,000. Walt continued, flipping a page. And he didn't use it to pay bills. He used it to cover losses on online sports betting sites and to buy into a series of cryptocurrency tokens that his wife was promoting on her social media channels. The tokens crashed 2 weeks ago. The money is gone. I felt sick. But the nausea turned to ice when Walt showed me the emails he had retrieved from Trent Halloran's hacked account. There was a message from Caleb dated 3 days before the accident. Once we get the guardianship finalized, we transfer the Valora Lex shares to the holding company you set up in Nevada. We can restructure the assets, sell off the equipment, and cash out before the end of the fiscal year. Mum won't know the difference. She will be medicated by then. I stared at the screen. My hand covered my mouth to stifle a sob. This wasn't just greed. This was an execution of my legacy. I raised him. I whispered, my voice breaking. I wiped his nose. I paid for his mistakes. How could he? Marcia leaned forward, her expression hard. Lorraine, listen to me. If you hesitate now, if you let that mother's guilt creep in for even a second, they will destroy you. Next time, they won't just push you down the stairs. They will finish the job. You have to kill the mother inside you to let the survivor live. I nodded slowly. The tears stopped. By the next morning, the court issued a temporary restraining order. Caleb and Sienna were legally barred from coming within 500 feet of me or accessing any family accounts. That was when my phone started blowing up. Caleb called 40 times in 1 hour. I sat there, listening to the voicemails with Marcia recording them for evidence. The first one was pitiful. Mum, please pick up. There is some mistake at the bank. My cards are declined. We can't buy groceries. Mum, I am sorry about the argument. Please call me. By the 10th message, the panic had set in. Mum, are you with that lawyer? You are making a huge mistake. Sienna is crying. You are hurting your family by the final message. The mask was gone entirely. His voice was a guttural snarl, unrecognizable as the boy I once held. You selfish bitch. You think you can cut me off? That is my money. I earned it putting up with you all these years. You are senile. You are crazy. I will tell the police you attacked Sienna. Pick up the phone. I saved the audio file and handed the phone to Marcia. Add it to the file, I said coldly. That night, I sat in the dark apartment, looking out at the city lights of Denver. My ribs throbbed with a dull, rhythmic ache. I held Thomas's letter in my lap, his handwriting a ghost in the dim light. I was alone. But for the first time in a long time, I was not afraid. You chose this road, Caleb, I said to the empty room, and I am going to walk you to the very end of it. The mandatory mediation took place in a windowless conference room that smelled of stale coffee and floor wax. Caleb arrived looking like a man who had not slept in 3 days. His suit was rumpled, his tie slightly askew, a stark contrast to the polished image he usually projected. Sienna, on the other hand, was in full performance mode. She wore a modest grey dress and no makeup, her eyes red-rimmed as if she had been weeping for hours. They were trying to sell a narrative to the court-appointed mediator that they were the concerned children, and I was the confused, manipulated elder being led astray by a predatory legal team. Across the mahogany table, Caleb leaned in, his voice dropping to a tone that mimicked tenderness. Mum, look, we can end this right now, he said, sliding a folder toward me. If you drop the lawsuit and the restraining order, we can settle this. I will agree to let you stay in the house. No nursing home. No facility. We will take care of you ourselves. Just come home. It sounded like an olive branch, but I heard the steel trap snapping shut behind it. He was offering me my own home as a concession. My hands trembled on the armrests of my wheelchair, but my voice was steady when I spoke. You just offered to keep me as a hostage in exchange for my silence. You are bargaining with my freedom to save your own skin. I refuse. Caleb's face hardened, the veneer of the loving sun cracking instantly. But it was Sienna who snapped. You are being so difficult, she shrieked, slamming her hand on the table. Do you have any idea how much work we put into this? We spent 6 months preparing those guardianship papers with the specialists. We did everything to make this transition smooth for you. The room went silent. The mediator, a retired judge with sharp eyes, paused his note-taking and looked up over his spectacles. Mrs. Doyle, the mediator said calmly to Sienna. Did you just admit to preparing guardianship documents 6 months prior to the incident in question? While implying the plaintiff was competent enough to live alone, Sienna turned pale, realizing she had just handed us a confession. I excused myself to the restroom, needing a moment to breathe. The heavy door swung shut, dampening the noise of the hallway. I was washing my hands when a stall door opened. It was Emma, my 12-year-old granddaughter. She looked terrified, her eyes darting toward the door to make sure her parents hadn't followed her. Grandma, she whispered, rushing over to me. She didn't hug me. Instead, She shoved a cracked iPad with a pink cover into my hands. I recorded them when they thought I was asleep. I don't want you to go to the bad place. She ran out before I could say a word. Back in the conference room, Marcia and I plugged headphones into the device. The audio was grainy, but the voices were unmistakable. "She is too resilient," Caleb's voice said on the recording. The fall didn't scare her enough to make her compliant. Then Trent's voice, crackling over a speakerphone. "Maybe she needs another accident. Something harder. If she breaks a hip, the doctors will sign off on the facility immediately. Just leave a rug loose at the top of the landing again." Marcia looked at me, her face grim. She immediately called a forensic audio specialist to authenticate the file. This was no longer just a civil dispute over money. This was conspiracy to commit bodily harm. By the time we left the courthouse, Caleb realized the walls were closing in. My phone began to buzz incessantly with text messages. He was spiraling. "I just want you to be happy. Mum, please stop this. If you keep going, the kids will lose their home. Do you want Emma on the street? You will die alone. You selfish old woman. No one loves you like we do." I did not block him. I read every single word, each one a dagger. And then I silently forwarded them to Marcia. He was building his own prison, brick by brick, with every desperate threat he sent. That night, in the safety of the temporary apartment, I could not sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of financial records and legal affidavits. In my hand, I held a photograph from 40 years ago. It was Caleb at 6 years old, sitting on my shoulders at a parade, laughing with pure, unadulterated joy. I ran my thumb over his smiling face. "Tomorrow," I whispered to the silence, "I am going to destroy you." I looked at the photo one last time before placing it face down on the table. The boy in the picture had died a long time ago. The man I was facing tomorrow was a stranger who had tried to kill me, and I was ready to bury him. The courtroom air was heavy, smelling of stale pine cleaner and impending ruin. The charges were read aloud, a laundry list of betrayals, elder abuse, attempted grievous bodily harm, financial exploitation, and conspiracy to defraud. Caleb's lawyer, a sweaty man in an ill-fitting suit, tried to paint a picture of a desperate son. He claimed Caleb was merely trying to protect a mother who had fallen prey to predatory legal counsel. But Marcia Levitt destroyed that painting stroke by stroke. She called the witnesses in a parade of damnation. The social worker testified about my fear. The doctor pointed out the bruising pattern that matched a shove, not a tumble. Walt, the investigator, laid out the spreadsheet of theft, the forged mortgages, the crypto losses, the payments to Trent. Then came the video. The courtroom darkened as the doorbell camera footage played on the large monitors. It was grainy, but the angle was undeniable. The jury watched Caleb's arms extend. They saw the force. They heard the sickening thud of my body hitting the floorboards. And then they heard the cold, crisp voice of Sienna instructing him to lie. Caleb shrank in his seat. Sienna looked at the floor. But the silence in the room became absolute when Marcia played Emma's recording. The audio crackled, but the words were razor-sharp. "Maybe she needs another accident." Trent's voice laughed from the speaker. "Something harder. If she breaks a hip, the doctors will sign off on the facility immediately." Caleb took the stand, trying to laugh it off. "It was just dark humor," he stammered, wiping sweat from his upper lip. "We were blowing off steam. Stress makes you say crazy things." Marcia did not let up. She pressed him on the money. She pressed him on the years of resentment. Finally, he snapped. His face turned a violent shade of red, and he slammed his fist on the witness stand. "I deserved that money," he screamed, his voice echoing off the wood paneling. "I spent my whole life being her trophy. I sat through her dinners. I pretended to care about her stupid company. She controlled everything. It was my turn." The gasps in the gallery were audible. He had just confessed that his love was a transaction. When I took the stand, I did not scream. I told the story of the girl who scrubbed toilets so her son would have soft hands. I looked at the jury, then at my son. "I am not here for revenge," I said, my voice steady. "I am here to take back the permission I gave him to hurt me." The judge, a woman in her 50s with eyes that missed nothing, delivered the verdict like a hammer blow. She denied Caleb's guardianship petition with prejudice. She declared me fully competent. She ordered the immediate return of the house, the shares, and every asset in the trust. Furthermore, the judge said, looking over her glasses at Caleb and Sienna, "I am issuing a 10-year restraining order against both defendants and Mr. Halloran, and I am referring the evidence of physical assault and conspiracy to the District Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution." The bailiff moved toward Caleb as the realization hit him. He wasn't just broke. He was going to prison. The final scene of this tragedy played out 2 days later in the driveway of the house I had bought for them. I stood on the lawn, leaning on my cane, watching the movers load the last of their things into a rental truck. Caleb was not there. He was in police custody awaiting bail. Sienna, pale and stripped of her arrogance, refused to look at me as she climbed into her car. Emma ran over to me before she got in the back seat. She hugged me carefully, mindful of my ribs. "I will be different than them." "Grandma," she whispered into my coat. "I promise." I pulled back and looked at her. I saw the same spark I once saw in Caleb, but this time, I would not smother it with gold. "I have set up a trust for you, Emma," I told her. "But you cannot touch a cent of it until you are 25, and only if you finish your education on your own. You have to prove you are worthy of it." She nodded, understanding the weight of the offer, and ran back to the car. I watched them drive away, the taillights fading down the suburban street. Silence reclaimed the driveway. I turned around and looked at the massive house. It was too big for one person. It was full of bad memories. But it was mine. I walked to the front door, my ribs aching with every step. But my back was straight. I had lost my son, but I had found the woman who built an empire from a bucket of soapy water, and she was not done living yet. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you guys are tuning in from, so please drop your city or country in the comments below so we can connect. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, please hit that like button. Subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary for more real-life stories, and smash that hype button to help this video reach more people who need to hear it. Stay strong, everyone.